So nobody buys the Ricoh GR III for its macro mode. But once you start using it, you realize how often it does come in handy and how perfect using the macro mode for ordinary moments can add to the story. Let's get into it. Most people think of the Ricoh GR III as the ultimate street camera, but for me, it's just the most versatile camera that I always have on me. And one feature that keeps surprising me over 6 years is the macro mode. It's one of those things you don't actually think about until you actually need it. And suddenly it's doing everything from vacations, food, some product photography. Certainly my experiences with the Ricoh GR III, but this equally applies to the GR4 as well. So using macro mode on the Ricoh GR III is super simple, and that's what makes it so effective. You just tap the macro button right here. By default, it's the up button on the four-way path, and you'll see that little leaf icon pop up, and suddenly your minimum focus distance drops all the way down to about 6 centimeters and up to 12 centimeters. I also mapped crop mode to the side button. It's the one that normally toggles Wi-Fi. I don't really use wireless transfer in the field, so I just overrode it. That way, with one hand, I can flip into macro, then crop in to either 35 or 50 mil if I need it, and that'll allow my macro shots to get even tighter at the expense of megapixels. Let's get into it. Let's start with the tiniest thing, bugs. So the first and most obvious use for macro when you have kids of a certain age is bugs. What I do is I usually pre-focus an edge and then gently lean forward or back to kind of fine-tune the focus on where I want it to be on the subject. You're not always going to get tack sharp focus, particularly when we're talking about bugs moving around, scurrying around and all that. But when you focus on the right part, it's got that unmistakable Ricoh character. A mix of sharpness, but also a lot of grit and grain that makes, to me, the picture feel like it's alive and has this character to it that my iPhone photos certainly don't. And here's one example of macro mode. This is a caterpillar here. You can see the fine hairs on this thing just blown out all over the place. You can see the very narrow depth of field, and I kind of missed the shot. I missed the focus on the shot, but it's still a usable photo to me. And here's another photo, and this one is of a bee that's caught in a spider web. So obviously this bee wasn't, I guess it's a wasp actually. This wasp wasn't moving that much anymore. So I didn't really need any special technique. I use center focus and then focus where the yellow meets the black and then reframe the focus to my desired focal point. And this is a spider photo that I took. You can see that a lot of the web is in focus, and that was the shot I was going for. The web was blowing in the wind just enough to make me lose focus quite often. I did probably take quite a bunch of photos. I think I just selected the shot, and this one was my favorite. So the Ricoh GR III is quite handy if you're just walking around on a nature walk with your kid. They see something interesting, and you can get in pretty tight to these tiny little objects that seem to really just engage and interest, kids. So the Ricoh is just super easy to get macro photos. Just pull it out, go into macro mode and take the shot and just put it back in your pocket. Okay, moving on, we'll continue the nature theme. Obviously there's a lot of colors and contrast in nature as you walk around on this nature walk. And again, when I'm outside with my kids, a lot of times they'll notice things, tiny little interesting things that in their mind, they're just creating stories. They just have this imagination running wild. And often I'll just try to memorialize that moment with a quick photo. So one photo I came across was, this mushroom one. They were just imagining two mushrooms protecting each other in the storm, huddled in the rain. And we got in pretty close with the Ricoh GR III, and this was the end result, and I'm pretty happy with the composition of this. And here's another tiny little slice of life, this moss growing on the bark here. So I often take these types of pictures so I can zoom in on them later on and see just, what's kind of growing in the world around you. So for me, I keep things pretty simple. No LEDs, no flashes, just natural light and some patience, really. It's just me and my EDC, and that's just what I carry with me. And here's another shot. This is of a dandelion spore, and I just like the way it was kind of floating in the air. You'll see a little hint of how it's staying up in the air there. It's being held up by a spider web there. But I just like the fact I was floating and I could get in pretty closely with the macro. Now I do remember that this was quite a windy day, so it actually took me a lot of shots to get this exact shot here. But I just like the fact that it kind of looks like it's just flying through the air, and I was able to catch it with a really nice blurry background. Mission accomplished for the Ricoh on this one. Now the Ricoh's color profiles, especially positive film, bring out this vivid, almost film-like tonality in greens and yellows. And generally I don't print a whole lot of photos. I think I would still feel pretty comfortable printing some of these. And here's another photo of this tiny flower that's just beginning to start life with many of its friends surrounding him. And just the morning sunlight touching this new life here. So the next category of photos that I want to cover is food photography. So when I'm traveling or just out with the family, I often do have the Ricoh GR III. I still find uses for macro mode in these circumstances. You could just use a GR3 as a regular camera to just walk around and shoot architecture. Then when you sit down for your meal, you've got a handy little camera that can really get in tight on whatever you're eating. Because the close-up of that ramen or that dessert is still part of the story of that day. Obviously, you can take very fine food photos without any kind of macro lens, but sometimes you just want to really get in tight, like I am doing right here with this scrumptious little pastry here. The Ricoh GR III, I try to simplify it as much as possible. Right angle and use available light, so I kind of move closer to the window for this type of shot here. I just hunt around for the light. And if you want to make the photo even more personal, get your subject there, but in the background, I often have my kids in the background of this photo. So I think he made this little gummy bear in class, so it doesn't look like the perfect gummy bear. But now I'll remember forever whose gummy this is now. And something about this gummy bear just cracks me up. Like it kind of looks like it's not even a bear. And with the macro lens, I was able to get really tight and really capture this expression of this creature, whatever it is. And having my son in the background adds depth and story. Like I'm not just capturing the food, but the relationship that my son had with this tiny little morsel and his enjoyment of this whole circumstance. And it's just moments like this that make the macro mode so versatile, especially if you're using your Ricoh as an EDC camera anyway. So macro mode is perfect for toys and honestly other small things that make up daily life. And when you start looking closer, you realize the stories hiding in plain sight. The chip paint on your kid's favorite action figure, the scratches on a keychain, the little wear marks on something that's been used 100 times. And when you start looking closer, you notice the stories hiding in plain sight. So for instance, I think this is Kylo Ren here, and he's gone through some battles with the way my kid plays with these toys. And you can see the little marks on his head. Now my son is really into clone troopers right now. And I really like how the macro mode can just really isolate this guy so well and just absolutely make the picture focus on this little minifigure. Probably could have stopped down a bit, get a bit more of it in focus, but I'm happy with this shot. I do think it's a pretty clean representation of this part of my child's life. Here's another shot of the clone trooper. I really like how the macro mode just absolutely makes the picture focus on this little minifig in the back. The shot almost feels filmic to me. Like it's part of these clone troopers going to battle. And in general, I really feel like the Ricoh shots in general give this kind of vibe to it that none of my other cameras do. And it's just so handy to have with you all the time. In terms of non-toy small things, I got this little, I think it's like a jigsaw blade. I actually forgot where I saw this. So I lined up the blade with the jagged part of the woodcut here. These details, like you get in so close, you can really look at it and see how the serration is meeting the wood based on this composition. This is a very small thing. It's like a key, smaller than a key basically. So you can see this in much greater detail than you would ever be able to see in real life. And these details tell you things about time, about habit, about how things are loved and used. And certainly this watch here, it's an Omega Speedmaster, but it's actually a birth year watch for my son. Now it's a story when I give this watch to my son later on in his life, then you'll see these scratches and remember that this is what dad made, and there's a story and character to all of these little objects that I think are worth remembering over time, especially if you're thinking of passing things on like this to your children. So you can get in real tight and see all the scratches, each of which carries a story. So another way I've been using macro mode, and this one's actually a bit more practical, is some level of product photography, i.e. Facebook Marketplace listings. It feels like I have a lot of cameras, but actually a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm buying used cameras on Marketplace and selling old cameras, so I don't actually end up spending a lot of my own income. It's just kind of from selling old camera gear and buying new ones. When I'm selling camera gear, I want to maximize the amount of money I get for each sale. So especially lenses or cameras, like the actual sensor, I'll often take macro shots of those parts of the camera and show that the item is in immaculate condition. For a lot of times I do kind of take care of my stuff. So I like showing the clean sensor. I like showing the lens and the pristineness of the lens as much as I can and give the buyers reassurance that what they're buying is in good condition and right away. And so if they see the picture is very interesting, they get pretty close, and that creates a conversation for which we can have a discussion about how much we're going to sell this item for. You can literally show the clean sensor or the text on a lens rim, and it gives buyers instant reassurance without much effort. When I'm selling gear, especially camera bodies or lenses, macro mode really lets me get in close to show that the item's in immaculate condition. And honestly, it doesn't require any special setup. What I often do is I just hold whatever it is I'm selling in one hand and the Ricoh in the other, walk up to the window and just take the shot of it right there. I'm not doing this professionally. It is really just getting a good shot, making interested buyers about the condition of the product, and then closing the sale from there. And I'll focus on the parts that buyers will be most interested in terms of making sure it's in immaculate condition. Okay, so let's talk about macro video. It's not my go-to, but not because of the macro ability. It's because video on the Ricoh generally is just not that good. That said, when you get it right, the footage can be usable. It feels analog, like a home video with a camera that's not really the top of the line camera. And I suppose I could use it for shorter, moodier clips, water dripping, moving paper textures around, just to break up stills in an edit. But I really don't like Ricoh GR video in general, so I just use my iPhone or one of my other cameras for that. The GR's macro mode is one of those features that you're not going to buy the camera for, but it's certainly very, very usable in unexpected ways. And if you're carrying the Ricoh every day already for street or travel photography or something like that, then it's nice to know you do have a macro mode in your pocket at all times too. From architectural shots to close-ups of toys and food and other things, you really do have a lot of versatility with this camera. I did recently test the Moment macro lens, and I do like the Moment macro lens quite a bit, especially for video. That really beats the GR in terms of macro video. You do get excellent bokeh as well with the iPhone, but when it comes to photos, the Ricoh shots in general, to me, have a lot more character. They're a lot more interesting to me. And it is easier to use the Ricoh GR III macro mode as well. You just pull it out, push the macro mode, and you're in macro. And you don't have to screw on a lens or anything like that. And something about the tones, the edges, and the texture is something that phones still can't replicate that the GR III has out of the box. So whether you're using the Ricoh GR III or the GR IV, I think the macro mode is worth exploring and spending a lot of time with. Anyway, that's it for this one. Subscribe if that's your vibe. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.